morning, dear students, and I hope you are all well and taking care of yourselves. Uh, Clean your hands, don't kiss each other too much, sneeze in your shoulders, in your sleeves, keep a distance. These are difficult times, and we have to make up for what we are missing. I'm going to give you a lecture on Al Ghazali, and this lecture is to be in parallel with the PowerPoint presentation which I have already posted. So I suggest that you open the PowerPoint presentation and then you listen to this YouTube, and at the same time, the readings are from the big book, the Harper's Reading. It's from pages 990 to page 995. These are the readings of Al Ghazali. So, let me start by then going through the text that we are reading. The text is called Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, which means deliverance from error, or the rescuer from error, as it is written in your book. Now, Al-Ghazali was born in Persia and in the city of Tus, and he is a 10th century Arab philosopher, a Muslim philosopher, and he died in the year 1111, which is easy to remember. The biography is there in your text. I'm not going to go through it. But one of the most important things was that he was also a professor in the university in Baghdad. And he went through a certain period of skepticism, of doubt. Not doubting in God, but doubting in where the truth lies. Because he was looking around him and he found that everybody claims they have possession of the truth. And he said, how can truth be reached, or how can God be reached, who is the highest truth? Through which methods? Therefore, he tried to see who has possession of the truth. Very much like the Socratic trip of searching for wisdom, he started by checking with the people who are the religious people, the theologians, the people who are the philosophers, and then he approached a certain group of people who are called the Sufis, which we will discuss more in detail. And then he found out that most of these claim that they have the truth, but not all of them have possession of the complete truth, because, as he said, theologians only can speak and say what is there without interpreting. The philosophers accept as truth only that which is to be proven. Therefore, important concepts like that God, the afterlife, and even the concept of the soul can never be proven. And therefore, if I take the scientific philosophical approach, philosophy and science were the same for the people in the past. Faith and religion went together, science and philosophy and reason went together. So if he was going to take the approach of the philosophers, he would deny that there is a God and there is a soul and there is an afterlife, because these cannot be proven. And hence, he thought that philosophy would lead to kufr, to blasphemy. And therefore, he approached the third group, who are the Sufis, that he thought they were, for him, the best group. Now, among the most important works that he wrote was a book called Tahafut al-Falasifa, which means the incoherence of the philosophers. And then he wrote this book, which is, for us, the reading, Deliverance from Error. So, he said that because everybody is claiming that they have access to the truth, that the diversity of beliefs and religions and the variety of doctrines that are dividing men rather than uniting them. Each group claims that they are in the possession of the truth, and hence, because of that, I am lost. It is like a big sea, an ocean, where all the ships are shipwrecked, and therefore we need to be able to swim back to the shore. He uses a lot this analogy of swimming and diving, and he says, if you cannot be a good diver or a good swimmer, avoid going and swimming in the ocean. In other words, if you are not ready to come back to your beliefs, do not try to deconstruct them because you would be left with nothing to hold on. Now, what is Sufism? And what is this concept that he describes in this book? Sufism was an Arab, it is an Islamic movement of mystics. Mystics, i.e., people who believe in asceticism, in taqashuf, in zuhd, in the concept of completely being dedicated to God. These are not the sophists of the Greek culture. The sophists were known as the Sufista'iyun. These are people called Sufis, basically because it started in the area of Baghdad. And because these people in the heat of Iraq, they used to wear these khish or suf clothes to make themselves suffer a little bit so that they can be closer to the suffering of other human beings. These people believe that it is very possible to completely be engaged in God and communicate with God without having mediators in between. And therefore, they try to rely on surahs which are found in the Quran that are more mystic or in a way lending to this kind of belief, spiritualism. Like, for example, when you say God is nearer to me than my jugular vein, than the warid, or when you say that God is a light and the light is in a glass and the glass is spreading all over from Surah An-Nur. These were all very popular surahs of them. The Sufi believes that God is everywhere, but God is also in me. So if I want to understand God and reach God, I don't have to go out and look at things. I have to go in, within me, and in order to be able to understand God, first I have to clean myself from all things other than God so that I can eventually join with God. So how was this process in fact explained? The Sufis believe that man is like a microcosm. Everything outside the world exists in man or in humanity. And if I want to understand basically how the world functions, I have to major in myself. If I understand my biology, my chemistry, my physics, my gravity, my mentality, and the way I think, the way I eat, the way I digest, gradually I am in fact so understanding the entire world. So man is nothing else but a small cosmos, a small example of the world outside. So based on this, the Sufis very much believed in taking a spiritual journey that would be a journey within. And to be able to do that, they would first have to start with a process. There is a whole manual of how to do that. So, as in prayer, the first thing in Islam is cleaning yourself, washing yourself. So, for the spiritual journey of the Sufi, the suluk, or what you have to do, you had basically to start with the physical purification. So the idea was that the first thing we need to do is to clean ourselves. Therefore, we are physically clean. But also, we have to clean our minds. We have to clean our souls. So how do you do that? How can you clean yourself? And how can you really be only concentrating on God? So the idea was that if you are, first of all, purifying your body, the next thing that makes you dirty is things that you say. So you have to start purifying your tongue. And then you have to start purifying your mind, because it's the mind that has these bad ideas that are then transmitted to the tongue that gives you the bad words. And then you have to purify your heart, because you should not carry these grudges and emotions in you. Here we find that it reminds us a little bit of Buddha's eight-wheel path, because again, Hinduism had a large influence on early Islam, and especially in Persia and other countries that were close. So we find that this is maybe the mystic approach was taken from the Hindus and the Buddhists, but then given in Islamic flavor, because you are now supporting it from evidence from the Quranic texts. The next thing we need to know about the Sufis was that there was also a system in the Sufi belief. These people used to withdraw from society and live together and have a kind of a meditation whereby they used to believe that, therefore, if I'm going to elevate my soul to God and I go through this purification of the body, the tongue, the mind, and the heart, then they have gone into a little bit of rotations and dancing and singing. Sufism was very close to music, and Sufism was very close to the concept of love, which is very, in Islam, it's not very much accentuated as such. For example, one of the Sufis was a certain lady in, by the way, women also joined very much in these Sufi ceremonies. One of them was called Rabi al-Adawi, who was living in Baghdad, and she used to go around carrying a bucket in her hand with full of water, and on the other hand she would carry a torch of fire. And somebody would ask her, Rabia, what are you doing with this? And she would say, I want to burn heaven and I want to put out the fire of hell, so that people would love God not because of the reward and the punishment, but simply because of God. In other words, we don't use God as a tool, as a means to something else, but that God is the end for which everything else is to be done. Now, in this Sufi method of progressing, they were levels. Like in the army, you have a corporal and a captain and a colonel and a lieutenant and so forth. So in the Sufi system, you had also levels. Some people reached higher, some people reached basics. They would all start by praying, they would all start by fasting. There was even a special book of recipes for Sufis, because they wanted them to eat things that would not give you indigestion. They would probably avoid beans and other things that could make people bloated. They would all start with meditating, and meditating on one thing that they would do is God. So they would even start saying Allah, Allah, Allah all the time. Or they would say Al-Haq, 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 which is the truth. Because by meditating on one thing, they thought that you would eliminate all the other things. So first they would go into this, and then they would reach a hal, a mystic state. And they thought that through the grace of God, through this state of reaching God, of this meditation, God will put his light on you, and then you will get into this completely being immersed in the light of God. Now, some people went a bit further, and they said there is fana. In other words, if God is 1 million volts, and if you're going to join God, you're going to be electrocuted. So you go into extinction, or you go to fana, or you go into a certain level of higher existence or state. How did Al-Ghazali conceive this? Ghazali thought that, how do we acquire knowledge? How to acquire truth? There are levels for acquiring truth. One of them is our senses, as Aristotle said. And he said the senses are good for early knowledge. They're reliable. But the senses also also sometimes deceive us, because if I take a coin and put it on my eye and I look at the moon, I think that the moon is as big as my eye, whereas my mind, hakim al-aql, comes and tells me this is wrong. So, if the mind corrects the senses, is there anything higher than the mind that corrects the mind? And therefore, he came to this idea that there is something that, for example, the Prophet had, which is called nubuwa, prophecy. Prophecy is that light. For example, the power with which the Prophet Muhammad could get the Quran is higher than reason and higher than senses. So there must be a level of meditation, of engagement with the higher powers that is above reason, that reason cannot explain. That everybody can reach that is not true. But we cannot deny that because some of them can reach them, that it doesn't exist. Therefore, he thought that there would be a higher level of knowledge, which is the level of this meditation and engagement. Also, it is important that Sufism also believed that this is a system of life that gets you directly in contact with God. And because it gets you directly in contact with God, therefore, many of the laws of, especially the fara'id, the Quranic laws, were a little bit bent. For instance, one of the Sufis called Al-Hallaj, who was at the end crucified and his ashes thrown into the Dijla River in Iraq, used to say, why should I fast the month of Ramadan? Because as a Sufi, I fast every day. So for him, he believed that, if I fast every day, 1 month is not enough for me. He also went around saying, I go around every day praying and I do the rotation and I do this atufu fil ghurfa. So he thought that, why should I go to Kaaba or to Mecca if I can do the Hajj at home? So these people were considered by the masses as blasphemy. What are you seeing? There are fara'id, you have to follow them. Now, as Ghazali was in this state of mind, there is a very nice movie, if you can access it. It's called The Alchemist of Happiness. It's about the life of Al-Ghazali. It's a bit long. I have it and I can show it in class whenever we have time and whenever we meet. But this shows a little bit the dilemma in which Al-Ghazali went. Al-Ghazali was brought up, as I said, in Iran. And he was a professor of university later in Baghdad. This is the Islamic empire, so there was no borders between these countries. And at some point, he was reluctant. On one hand, he wanted to do his duty, teach as a professor, educate students. On the other hand, he was in that mood of leave everything, go in search of your soul, find yourself, find God, and abandon everything. But he had a wife, he had children, he had family. So there were always these things that pull you down and they don't let you fly if you want to. Until one point came where, in fact, and he used to pray to God and say, God, please help me to make this decision. And then one day he says, God did the decision. He woke up one morning and his tongue was completely paralyzed. He could not speak anymore. And therefore, as a professor of a university, how can you go to class and not be able to lecture? So the decision was taken on his behalf, and he had to resign. And he gave enough provisions for his family to live. And he took himself and he went away for 10 years, searching for God, meditating, praying in deep pilgrimage. First he went to Damascus and he prayed for years there and meditated. Then he went to Jerusalem and tried to follow the place of Isra and Ma'raj, which the Prophet has been on. And after rotating all throughout, he found out that for him, the Sufi way was the best way. And I want to read from the text that we have, the passage that he talks about. And he said that, this is on page 994. So, first he describes what is the mystic way? And he said, how is a mystic way, a tariqa, described? The purity, which is the first condition, which I talked about, like bodily purity, is the purification of the heart completely from anything other than God. If you can only switch to one idea, which is God. And then he talks about how, this is on page 994, if you follow it. This stage, which is the first stage, and then takes you to other stages, which he describes as hulul, ittihad, and some as wusul, or connection with God. And then he comes and says that I have discovered, as a conclusion, I learned with certainty, he says, I learned, page 993, the last line, I learned with certainty that it is above all the mystics who walk on the road of God. So above all the people I have searched, their life is the best life. Their method, the soundest method. Their character, the purest character. Indeed, were the intellect of the intellectuals, and the learning of the learned, and the scholarship of the scholars, who are versed in the profundities of revealed truth, brought together in the attempt to improve the life and character of the mystics, they would find no way of doing so. For to the mystics, all movement and rest, whether external or internal, brings illumination from the light of the lamp of prophetic revelation. Prophetic revelation, nubuwa. And behind the light of prophetic revelation, there is no other light on the face of the earth from which illumination may be received. This is page 994, the first paragraph. So after doing his seeking and searching for 10 years, he came to the conclusion, to the first thing that he started to do, that who has the truth? He thought that the people who have the most reliable truth regarding God are these Sufis, because they are in a constant communication with God. But he also discovered, when he came back and he talked about this, that the people were not accepting this very much. And he came to the conclusion that although this is the soundest method that he has reached, there is also the problem that if everybody cannot become a Sufi, and if I say that only the Sufis can reach God, then the conclusion is that I'm going to make the others think they are non-believers. And we will see this again in Ibn Tufayl next week. So what he tried to do is, he for himself knew that this was the best method. But for the sake of Ammat al-Sha'b, he had to go telling them that this is, if whatever you believe in, go and continue doing it. Do the fara'id that the Quran has, Islam has imposed on you. Follow the right systems. Pray. And don't be min al-dallin. But in his mind, if you asked Al-Ghazali, who are the Sufis? Are they the companions of the right? He would say, no, maybe they are the outstrippers, as-sabbaqun, al-musbaqun, those who come first, because for him these were the elite, these were the highest group that reached this special state of truth. So in short, what is the position of Al-Ghazali regarding faith? Faith is very strong. Faith is what God gives you. Faith is the light that God gives you, the huda that gives you the possibility of reaching Him. Philosophy is interesting, but philosophy can be confusing. When he said the incoherence, tahafut al-falasifa, he was showing us that al-falasifa could lead us to kufr. So he was not in favor of having everybody take philosophy books and discuss, although he himself is described as a philosopher of Islam. He was also given the title of Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam, because of his extreme educational and logical mind. But he also believed that there are certain people who can go beyond the normal ways of truth through prayer and meditation and fasting and complete immersing in the light of God. And these are the people who are, according to him, the closest and the most loved by God. Thank you.